The Entrepreneur's Library, episode 227.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Library, the only book-centric podcast that reviews all the top-selling business books and shares authors' perspective firsthand. This is your resource to finding the next great book that will enable you to grow personally and professionally. Welcome your host, Wade Danielson.
Welcome back to the EL. Today we have Todd Tresidder, author of How Much Money Do I Need to Retire? Welcome, Todd, and thank you for joining us on the Entrepreneur's Library.
All right, thanks for having me, Wade.
Before we take a deep dive into your book, will you take just a moment to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you personally.
Yeah, so my background was hedge fund investing. I came out of college and I had this crazy idea. First of all, I have to set a context because I'm 53 right now. So this was back when IBM came out with the first PC, the first personal computer, and Apple was just getting started. They were still in a garage, and they came out with the first Apple computer. And there was no databases or anything. And I had this crazy idea that I could make money from investing statistically or mathematically, that you didn't actually have to know the investments themselves, that it was all math. And I approached my investments professor with it, and he said, no, it wouldn't work. And my father said it wouldn't work. And those were the only two, investment icons in my life. But I was clear it would work, and I did a bunch of research, and it turned out it was right. And I was one of the early pioneers of the hedge fund business. And so I retired, and I do that in air quotes. If you could visually see me, I'm holding air quotes up. I retired at age 35, which was obviously 18 years ago. And then I started building an education business. I had a lot of people ask me questions about how did I do it? I mean, it's fairly unusual achievement. And they weren't even asking the right questions was the problem. This was back in the go-go days of the great stock mania going up into the 2000 top in the stock market. And everybody thought, wealth was about hot stock tips, just like in, 2007, everybody thought wealth was about real estate. And some days everybody will think wealth is about gold or commodities or something. It just cycles through with whatever the bubble du jour is. But anyway, people were asking the wrong questions. I really avoided the conversation altogether. And finally, one day, my wife kind of took me to task and said, well, Todd, you spent a lifetime learning this stuff and it totally works. And you figured it out and nobody seems to understand it. Why don't you do something with it? And so I had just enough ego to think I could actually help people. And so I went out and started building Financial Mentor, which is it's kind of an advanced education website where I don't do the basics. I don't talk about budgeting or saving or balancing a checkbook or any of the usual stuff that you see on personal finance blogs. Everything I write about is advanced retirement planning, advanced investment strategy, stuff like that. It's really geared around wealth building. So it's for people who are past the basics and are looking for the next step.
So Todd, thank you for sharing that. And that leads right into what we're about to discuss, which is that book, How Much Money Do I Need to Retire? Which was made available for purchase back October of 2012. And Todd, we're going to move quickly. But really our whole goal here today is to cover those top questions that the listener and the future reader would like to get answered before they dive in and invest in and dive into your book. And the first one is, what was the inspiration behind writing How Much Money Do I Need to Retire?
Well, it was my coaching clients. Since I was coaching people on how to build wealth, of course, it was one of the number one questions was how much money do I need? Because retirement is just a euphemism for old age financial independence, right? So we're really talking about how much money do you need in order to be financially independent? And so I just, I got so tired of answering the question over and over, and it wasn't a service to my clients. And so I just wrote the book on the subject because nobody else had done a proper job of it. Most of the information out there is either downright incorrect or a dangerous half-truth. It really doesn't explain how the process works. And so there's just a real need for a book that covered the subject properly because it's an important question that everybody's going to confront.
So you started to dive into this next question just a little bit, and maybe you can go a little bit further into depth because I think it's so important when we ask, what makes your book different from others regarding the same or similar topic?
Well, the way most people come at the subject is they come at it from an asset-based approach. They have a single answer. So, they come at it and say, well, you need X millions of dollars, whatever it is. And there's a relationship between your spending and how much assets you need. And so there's a whole traditional approach where you go online or you go to your broker or financial advisor and they use a retirement calculator. And I have one up on my site also because I didn't like the way most of them function. I felt there was a whole different approach to it as we're explaining here. So I created my own retirement calculator. And that's how most people approach it. And they put in a whole bunch of assumptions. You have to put in assumptions like what will your investments return and how much you're going to spend and how long you're going to live and all these different assumptions. And, it's fine for what it is, but it's only one little kernel of the whole picture.
Gotcha. And I want to jump in real quick and ask you a question that's a little bit different before we jump into the deep dive. And that's how did you design the book to be read? I mean, is this one that a person can jump in and jump out, cherry picking information as needed? Or did you really design it or write it to be read from front to back?
Yeah, no, it's really designed to be read front to back, because what I do is I start with the traditional model and then I explain alternative models. And so, every act of creation is at first an act of destruction, right? And so you have to start. What I've learned in teaching people and working with people on this material is that you have to start with where they're at. And so I have to start with the traditional model. I have to explain its shortcomings as well as its good parts. And so the first half of the book is built around that. And then the second half of the book develops it from there. And so it's really designed to be read cover to cover, start to finish. And if you only get part of the way through, you've really done yourself a disservice. I actually talked to somebody recently who got about 2/3 way through and felt like he had the story, and he missed the most important part because one of the last chapters gives a whole additional model, and he was like blown away when I explained it to him.
So Todd, now that you've given us some background, some purpose behind the book, even the inspiration, now this is my favorite part where I'm asking you to take the next 5 to 8 minutes and give us a deep dive into the content. So you take the next 5 to 8 minutes and give this listener, this future reader, a great idea of what your book's all about.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll take 5 to 8, but let me give it a shot. So, as I said, the whole first half of the book is all about the traditional model, but I take it a whole cut deeper. So you start with the traditional approach, which is, you use the retirement calculator, you plug in all these assumptions, but then I go through the assumptions one by one and I explain why they can't be made properly. So, for example, one of the assumptions is life expectancy. Nobody knows when they're going to die. That's an impossible assumption to make. Or investment return. Nobody has any idea what their investment return will be over the next 30 years. It's a guess at best. And then, another assumption that's required is inflation. PhD economists who spend their entire career training for this can't forecast it 1 year into the future, and you're expected to forecast it for 30 years into the future. So anyway, I go through these assumptions one by one, and I help you create a range of viable values. I help you understand how to work with that assumption in a constructive way. And then what we do is we build a confidence interval. So you have a retirement estimate based on pessimistic assumptions, and you have a retirement estimate based on confident assumptions or optimistic assumptions. And so that creates your confidence interval using a traditional plan, a traditional approach. And that's one approach. It's called the asset-based approach. Then the book goes through and it takes a whole nother tact. And this is where you can start having breakthrough results. It goes through what I call lifestyle planning for retirement. And the whole premise here is that for every $1,000, and of course, these are rough rules, right? But it comes from the 4% rule, which equates out to the rule of 25. And these are common rules in retirement planning. And so it basically says that for every $1,000 per month you spend in retirement, it requires anywhere from $300,000 to $400,000 in assets to support it. And again, this is a benchmark, but it's a usable benchmark. It's a useful benchmark, right? And so it goes through and it says, well, is it easier for you to accumulate $300,000 or $400,000 more in savings, or is it easier for you to redesign your retirement and your lifestyle so you're not giving up any quality of life whatsoever, but you can retire earlier, or you can retire with greater security by just adapting your spending structure? So, for instance, some people decide, hey, I'm going to go live out of a motorhome and go fishing. And other people decide they want to travel the world because it turns out international travel is cheaper than living in the U.S. So there's, a lot of different ways in which you can redesign your life so it can be every bit as fulfilling or more fulfilling at a fraction of the cost. And so that's what I call lifestyle planning around retirement. And that's a great way to make ends meet if they don't already. And then the third piece of the model, or the third part of the book, is what I call cash flow-based retirement planning. So remember, the first part was asset-based, the second part was lifestyle design, and then the third part is cash flow-based. Now, here's the kind of unsung secret in retirement planning is everybody talks about assets. You can even look at the title, how much money do I need to retire? That term is more popular in retirement planning itself in search, in the algorithms on Google. And the reason for that is it's the number one question for retirement planning, but it implies assets, right? And so what I do in the third model in the book is I point out that really retirement or financial independence at any age is about cash flow exceeding expenses. So then we go into cash flow based models. And that's a whole different approach. That's more than just a semantics because it has a different implication for how you invest, how you build assets, everything. It's a complete turnaround in the approach to retirement planning. So that's kind of the book in a nutshell.
That's fantastic. And you definitely did put it in a nutshell. And that's why I feel like this next question might be tough because I'm asking you to break it down even a step further. In that, if the reader could only take away one concept, principle, or action out of everything you just discussed with us, your entire book, what would you personally want that to be?
There is no magic number. There's a whole magic number myth out there about retirement planning, right? We've even seen the commercials on television where everybody's walking around with a red number on their forehead until it hits, and then suddenly they're financially independent. There's this magic retirement number myth, or the retirement number myth. Anyway, that's not true. Okay. You can get a number, it can point true north, but there's no such thing as a number because you'd have to have a perfect forecast of reality to make that anywhere close to real. And nobody can do that. The future can't be forecast with any reliability. And so what you want to recognize is that everything's an estimate and your retirement planning is an iterative process. It's worth doing to set true north, to find a true north that you point toward, to give a generalized goal. But understand it's a range of outcomes. There is no definitive number, and you will work with your retirement number throughout your retirement as numbers come in. And so, for example, as your assumption about investment return starts to show up in reality, right? As you're 10 years in and you can look at your investment return for the first 10 years, how did it match your estimates? How's inflation matching your estimates? How's your spending matching your estimates? And you keep iterating it. You keep improving upon it and honing it in. It's like a guided missile heading towards a target. I don't know if you've seen the studies on this, Wade, but it's something like the guided missile as it heads towards its target is off track like 98% of the time, and yet hits the target very closely because it's constantly approximating and getting closer and closer.
That's incredible. I did not know that. 98% of the time.
Oh, yeah, don't hold me to the number. It's something like that.
But something huge like that.
Yeah, it's a vast majority of the time the missile is actually off target because it's constantly correcting its flight because wind's blowing it off track. All these things are changing its direction. It's constantly iterating it until it finally hits the target. And that's the analogy you want to use for retirement planning, whether it's 90% or 98. I don't have the exact number.
Well, that's fantastic. So the very first thing you said when you were answering that question was, I believe, quote worthy. And that leads into our next question, which is, do you have a favorite quote from your book? Or maybe it's a quote that has resonated well with the audience. And can you take a second to explain what that means to you?
Yeah, there's actually there's a bunch of fun quotes in the book. I'm a quote junkie, right? So if you'll indulge me, I'll pull a couple out.
Yeah.
The first one is from John Kenneth Galbraith. He's a famous economist. And he says, the only function of economic forecasting is to make astrology look respectable. And, of course, the point of that quote is this whole idea that I was sharing earlier about how assumptions, nobody can make them reliably, and yet every retirement calculator out there requires you to make a bunch of assumptions as if you can forecast the future, as if you have a crystal ball. And of course, none of us do. And retirement planning done in the traditional sense is only as reliable as the accuracy of those inputs. And the chance of those inputs being accurate is close to zero. And so that's kind of the meaning behind that quote and why I find it so enjoyable. The second quote is by Mark Twain, who I've always enjoyed. He's a great American humorist. And he says, whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it is time to pause and reflect. And that's kind of a consistent feature in all my books. I tend to be a bit of a contrarian. I don't write a book unless it has something new to say, unless it has something interesting or a different twist on the subject. And so, this book is a completely different approach to retirement planning. It's not in the mainstream. And you'll even see occasionally a negative review, and I swear they must be financial planners, who have done it in a mainstream way and they don't like how I approached it. So anyway, it's not in the mainstream. It respects the mainstream, right? I show the value of it. We don't throw it out. We don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? We keep what's good from the mainstream, and then we build on the shoulders of it and create a more dynamic, more accurate model.
No, that's fantastic. And Todd, thank you for sharing those. We'll put those in the show notes so people can go back and reflect on those. Again, I think entrepreneurs in general sometimes are what you called yourself, quote junkies, and they take a little bit of time to process and re-look through and kind of put it in your own, what that quote means to you. So we'll put those so they can go back and reflect on those more. And Todd, this next question is going to move away from your book for just a moment. And that's asking that if there was only one book you could recommend based on the way that it's changed your life, maybe created a lifestyle or a paradigm shift, which book would you suggest?
Well, several books come to mind. I love books, and, certain books have really changed my life. One I'm particularly fond of, because I'm a creator, right? I mean, I build my website, I write my books, I create courses, I'm a creator. And anybody in the creative field runs into a thing called resistance with a capital R. And I think the guy who wrote the book on it literally is Steven Pressfield. He's got the landmark book he wrote was The War of Art, not to be confused with Lao Tzu's book, The Art of War. This is The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. He's got another book out called Do the Work and Turning Pro. And they're all around the same subject, which is anytime you try to advance your life forward, humans are hardwired to run into this bizarre thing called resistance that holds us back from advancing our lives forward. And there's a specific discipline around how you overcome that resistance and move yourself to a higher level. And it's very difficult, very challenging. And Stephen wrote it because he's a writer. And so he encountered it every time he faced the blank page and had to write a book. And he noticed that it was a phenomenon of artists. I'm passionate about it because I help people move forward in their life through wealth building. And I've noticed that it's the same thing. The phenomenon has nothing to do with just the creative arts. It has to do, but that's where Stephen founded the ideas. It has to do with just moving your life forward. So in my field, coaching people to wealth, they run into the same issues around resistance. And so it's a great book. It's a game changer.
No, that's fantastic. I believe it's the first time it's been recommended. So I always love getting brand new books.
Do you want another one?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, yeah. Please give us another one.
There's another fun book out there by Cal Newport called So Good They Can't Ignore You. Have you run into that one yet?
I have not.
Yeah, that's a fun book. Cal, there's a whole idea out there about the passion hypothesis, right? That you're supposed to do what you're passionate about, and that's where your success comes from. And Cal really took that to task in a very insightful way. And I got a lot of really interesting ideas out of that. But basically, the title comes from a quote by Steve Martin, who's famous for becoming so good at a couple different fields they couldn't ignore him, right? First, it was comedy. But later on, he became a really successful banjo player, which surprised a lot of people. I mean, acclaimed banjo player. And his whole premise was to become, you don't run around and market yourself. You don't have to go out and promote yourself. I mean, you have to do the basics, right? So you're visible. But the whole idea is you just want to become so good they can't ignore you.
Yeah, that's a fantastic concept. And again, we'll reference these resources as a fellow book lover. It's just like this never-ending book list. And you did a fantastic job of promoting both of those. So I appreciate that. And Todd, before we do depart today, can you recommend the best way for our listeners to not only get more information on you, but also get more information on your book? How much money do I need to retire?
Yeah, I mean, you can get the book at Amazon. You can either search for How Much Money Do I Need to Retire? It's the top book in that subject. You can search in retirement planning. I think it's on page 1. It's a little buried in the word retirement, or you can just look up my name, Todd Tresidder. And then if you want to learn more about my work, everything I do is over at financialmentor.com. That's financialmentor.com, all one word. And you can even get the books from the sidebar over there on any page.
Excellent. Well, Todd, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your book with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Wade.
Thanks again for listening in today. If you'd like more information on Todd or his book, How Much Money Do I Need to Retire? Check out the show notes at the elpodcast.com.
Looking for your next book idea? Head over to the elpodcast.com, where Wade shares his amazing resource, the top 10 business books recommended by over 500 entrepreneurs, with you for free. That's the elpodcast.com. Till the next time, keep it on the EL.